Hello everyone. Welcome back to Improved Version, a channel dedicated to sharing profound knowledge on holistic personal development through the lens of life-changing books. It is a privilege to have you here today as we dive into a topic that is as uncomfortable as it is essential for our growth. If she dares to divorce me, she'll never see her children again. If you marry her, don't ever think of me as your father again. If you leave me, I won't be able to go on living. If you can't work overtime with the team this weekend, I might have to reconsider your upcoming promotion. Do these phrases sound familiar to you? Do they strike a chord of recognition or perhaps a lingering note of pain? In reality, we have all, to varying degrees, either been in these situations, witnessed them in the lives of those we love, or perhaps even found ourselves uttering similar words in a moment of desperation. What is truly noteworthy and perhaps most painful is that these words almost always come from the very people closest to us. It could be your spouse, your parents, your closest friends, or your long-term colleagues. These individuals might genuinely believe they are doing what is best for you in their own way, but their methods end up causing you immense suffering. In some cases, they might even use the guise of love as a sophisticated cloak to control the direction of your life. Susan Forward, a renowned psychotherapist and a New York Times bestselling author, coined a specific term for this phenomenon: emotional blackmail. While the word blackmail usually brings to mind a criminal kidnapping a loved one for a ransom of money, in the psychological context, it is much more subtle. It is about using emotions to manipulate your heart. It is the act of transforming your fear, your sense of obligation, and your deep-seated guilt into a weapon designed to gain your absolute obedience. Because the person you care about most is also the one who understands your vulnerabilities best, they are uniquely positioned to push you into a protracted emotional battle. This is the very essence of emotional manipulation. This week, we are exploring Susan Forward's classic work, Emotional Blackmail. This book is a staple in modern psychology because it helps you identify the invisible signs of this behavior, understand the mechanics of how it operates, and most importantly, provides you with the tools to respond effectively. By understanding these concepts, you can restore trust, break the vicious cycle of manipulation and resignation, and ultimately escape the confusing labyrinth of a toxic relationship. This book is for anyone who feels lost or hurt within their most intimate relationships, places that should have been a haven of peace, but have instead become a source of stress. Now, please settle in and listen to today's deep dive into the human heart. How do we begin to diagnose emotional manipulation when it takes the form of exploiting our deepest vulnerabilities? To make this easier to understand, let us use the phrase emotional manipulation as we navigate this terrain. We need to realize that this occurs when another person has grasped your weakness, used it as a psychological hostage, and turned it into a condition that forces you to obey them. Typically, this type of manipulation can take the form of direct, blunt threats. These are easy to recognize. If you leave, you lose the kids. If you don't do what we say, you're no longer part of this family. The purpose of the manipulator here is clear. They use the threat of a catastrophic consequence to force your submission. However, in most cases, the situation is far more subtle and therefore more dangerous. It hides behind a harmonious facade. It is cloaked in beautiful memories, initial displays of intense attention, and the pretense of doing it for the family. This makes you unaware of the control that is slowly creeping in, leading the other person to cross your safe boundaries and forcing you into reluctant compromises. Under hidden pressure, Susan Forward summarizes this phenomenon into 6 distinct stages. To see how this unfolds in a real-life scenario, let's look at a specific example involving a couple we will call Sarah and David. Sarah has been working long hours all week, often staying late at the office. Sunday is her only day off, her only chance to completely rest her body and mind. However, her husband David places a very high importance on visible family activities. He believes the whole family should go out for an excursion every single weekend, regardless of how everyone feels. One Saturday evening, feeling utterly exhausted, Sarah gently says to David, "I'm really worn out this week. Can we just stay home and rest on Sunday? Maybe we could just take a short walk in the neighborhood instead of a full trip." David immediately responds, "I know you're tired, Sarah, but I'm just as exhausted as you are. Going out is actually a way to relax and unwind. It'll do you good." Sarah, however, knows that going out involves a series of stressful preparations, packing bags, navigating traffic, and managing the kids while her body is already aching. She tries to maintain her stance. "I'm just too tired, David. I really don't want to go anywhere." This is when David increases the pressure. He completely disregards her feelings and says, "We promised the children we'd go out this weekend. If you change your mind now, they'll be devastated. I can't be a parent who breaks his promises. And what about your parents? They were expecting to see photos of our trip. If they knew you were just sitting at home, they certainly wouldn't be happy." Hearing this, Sarah is flooded with guilt. She tells herself that David only wants what is best for the children, and since a promise was made, she shouldn't be the one to break it. Despite her deep exhaustion, she reluctantly agrees to go. However, the trip brings no joy. She spends the day in a fog of fatigue, and her physical health worsens. This scenario doesn't just happen once, it becomes a pattern. David continues to use these moral and emotional arguments to force Sarah into compliance, regardless of her needs. To an outsider, their behavior looks like a typical family dynamic, perhaps even an example of a dedicated father. But beneath the surface lies a 6-stage process of emotional manipulation. The first stage is the demand. In any healthy relationship, it is normal to express a desire, but in a manipulative dynamic, the request is not a suggestion, it is an implicit command. There is no room for a no. The second stage is resistance. When faced with an unreasonable request, the other party has every right to say no, as Sarah did. This resistance is a natural instinct to protect one's personal boundaries. However, if this resistance is not backed by clear awareness, it is often very weak. This leads to the third stage, pressure. The manipulator uses seemingly reasonable or even loving arguments to persuade the other party. David argued that going out is relaxing, effectively telling Sarah that her perception of her own exhaustion was wrong. If pressure doesn't work, the manipulator moves to stage 4, threats. They exploit the other person's deepest fears. In Sarah's case, the fear of being a bad parent or a disappointing daughter-in-law. When guilt overwhelms reason, we enter the 5th stage, compliance. The person gives in, not because they want to, but because the emotional cost of saying no has become too high. Finally, we reach the 6th stage, restarting. After the tension subsides, things seem to return to normal. But the cycle is now established. The next time a demand is made, the manipulator knows exactly which buttons to press, and the cycle repeats. Most people caught in the cycle are completely unaware of what is happening. It is like a thick fog obscuring their vision. They feel a constant sense of friction with the person they love most. but they can't put their finger on why. To lift that fog, you must understand the 4 primary behavioral tactics of emotional manipulators. The first tactic is dualistic thinking. This is a black and white way of viewing the world. In the eyes of a manipulator, there are no gray areas. If you don't completely side with them, you're against them. If you truly loved me, you would do this. This corners the other person, labeling any form of resistance as a lack of love or a moral failing. There is no room for legitimate personal needs in this framework. The second tactic is pathological interpretation. In any relationship, disagreements are normal, but an emotional manipulator will turn your healthy desire for boundaries into a sign of psychological instability. If you ask for private time, they might say, "You're only pushing me away because of your past trauma. You have a fear of intimacy and you really need therapy." By turning your natural reactions into symptoms of a disease, they make you lose confidence in your own mind. You start to wonder if they are right. Are you actually cold or hurt or unstable? Once you doubt your own sanity, you are much easier to control. The third tactic is the creation of alliances and factions. When their own logic isn't enough to sway you, some manipulators will bring in the crowd. They will mention what the neighbors think, or they will invite a family member over to talk sense into you. You end up feeling isolated in your own home, as if everyone is pointing a finger at you, labeling you as irresponsible or insensitive. The fourth tactic is the use of negative comparisons. Most of us have been compared to a sibling or a perfect colleague at least once. These seemingly harmless comments, when repeated, gnaw away at your self-esteem. Mark's wife always supports his career moves. Why can't you be more like her? These comparisons are designed to make you feel inadequate and guilty, pushing you to work twice as hard just to prove your worth. So why do we suffer so much in the face of these demands? And who are the people most easily manipulated? First, we must accept a difficult truth. When emotional manipulation occurs, it is not a one-sided act. While we must not blame the victim, we must acknowledge that a manipulator cannot exist without the reaction of the manipulated. Your reactions and your internal thoughts have contributed to the dynamic. It is time to look at ourselves. Initially, not realizing you were being manipulated was not your fault. In intimate relationships, we naturally let down our defenses. We want to believe that the other person's demands come from a place of care. But if we remain silent or give in to unreasonable requests, we are making a mistake. We fantasize that one more concession will finally bring peace. But the opposite happens. Once a manipulator discovers that a certain button works, they will press it again and again. They will not let go of the hostages that give them absolute control. What are these hostages? They're your fear, your sense of obligation, and your guilt, the fog of emotional blackmail. The people closest to you know exactly what you're afraid of. You might fear abandonment, the loss of their love, the end of a long-term relationship, or the loss of your reputation. You might fear being seen as irresponsible because society values responsibility so highly. When you're labeled as irresponsible, the guilt can be overwhelming. You start to believe you are the cause of all the unhappiness in the house. You accept self-sacrifice to fix things that aren't even yours to fix. You stay on a path that you know is wrong because you don't want to admit you chose the wrong person or the wrong life. This mixture of fear and guilt creates a mental spiral. You fall into self-reproach and lose your true self. But no matter how afraid you are, you must remember that if you're hurting, you have the right to cry out. You need to speak up for the part of you that needs to be loved. You must look straight at your fears and ask, am I becoming someone who exists only to be manipulated? The author identifies four types of people who are most vulnerable to this. First is the person who craves validation. Because they fear criticism, they constantly seek praise and try to please others at all costs. This makes them live according to someone else's judgment. Second is the pacifist. Terrified of conflict, they choose silence to maintain a fake peace, which only allows the negative emotions to accumulate inside them. Third is the overly self-blaming person. They feel they must carry every burden and be responsible for everyone's happiness. Fourth is the self-doubter. Lacking confidence, they believe the judgments of others more than their own inner voice. They are easily led and easily broken. So, how do we respond? Many people think the only solution is to leave the relationship immediately. While sometimes necessary, leaving is often just a temporary escape. If you leave but remain weak and filled with the same fog, you will likely carry those patterns into your next relationship. Ending a relationship out of pure anger is often just another way of trying to punish the other person. Punishment is never the path to peace of mind. To truly cope, you must understand not just your own psychology, but that of the manipulator as well. Most emotional manipulators are not evil villains. They are often children who suffered their own deep emotional traumas. They view emotions as a win-lose game. They feel they must win to feel valued. If they don't get their way, they feel defeated and lash out to regain control. They might punish you, or they might even punish themselves through self-harm or threats of suicide. When you see that their strength is actually a mask for extreme weakness, they become pitiable rather than terrifying. Maturity in a relationship isn't about easily ending it, but about being able to confront yourself and the other person with clarity. This book suggests 4 primary strategies for when you realize you're being manipulated. The first strategy is to abandon defensive communication. If a manipulator calls you selfish, and you respond, "No, you're the selfish one," you're just adding fuel to the fire. This type of communication ignites emotions and makes the conversation a battlefield. The key is to break the tension by refusing to play the game. Instead of defending yourself, try saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I understand that you're angry, and perhaps we should sit down and talk about this when things are calmer." By letting go of the need to be right or to defend your character, you regain your composure. The second strategy is to turn the other person into an ally. When you feel stuck, invite the other person to help you solve the problem. Instead of resisting, seek their advice. Ask questions like, "Can you help me understand why this trip is so important to you?" Or "What do you think we should do to solve this disagreement in a way that works for both of us?" People generally don't like being blamed, but they are often very willing to help find a solution if they are sincerely invited to do so. When they are part of the decision-making process, they are much more likely to cooperate. The third strategy is the exchange of conditions. When faced with a selfish demand, don't just resist or cave in. Be flexible but firm. Aim for a win-win where both sides share the responsibility. For example, an employee being pressured to stay late might say, "I understand that this project is urgent, and I value my role here. I can stay for an extra hour today if I can leave an hour earlier on Friday to be with my family. Next time, if you could let me know by Wednesday, I can prepare even better." This clearly defines your boundaries while still respecting the other person's needs. The fourth strategy is using humor. Nothing bridges the gap between two people like shared laughter. Humor can be a powerful thread of connection. Imagine a husband who is habitually lazy with housework and responds to reminders by saying, "I work all day to support this house. I deserve to rest. Do you want me to collapse?" Instead of a lecture, the wife might bring out a handmade trophy made of paper that says, "World record holder for sitting still." She could hand it to him with a serious face and say, "Congratulations on breaking the 2-hour mark of watching football without moving." The audience is very impressed. If done with love and not sarcasm, both will laugh. The husband feels the point without feeling attacked, and he's much more likely to get up and help. Humor reduces tension and allows for change to happen naturally. As we conclude this exploration, I have a few words for those of you who feel like hostages in your own lives. Love should be a sanctuary, a peaceful place to return to. But all too often, it becomes the place that hurts us most deeply. When intimacy is exploited for control, we fall into a labyrinth where trust and guilt are indistinguishable. You must believe that you do not need to compromise your soul to receive love. You deserve to be loved for who you are, and that starts with being true to yourself. When you live according to your authentic, loving self, the power of the manipulator naturally fades. They can no longer abduct your peace because your worth is no longer tied to their approval. Escaping emotional manipulation doesn't always mean leaving, but it always means changing the way you participate. Learn to love without losing yourself. Learn to maintain your reason and your clarity. Learn to let go of the desperate need for external recognition. I truly hope that today's sharing from Improved Version helps you begin to untangle the complicated knots in your heart. May you find the peace and the strength you need on your journey back to yourself. Thank you so deeply for listening to this extensive exploration of the human spirit. If you found this discussion on emotional blackmail helpful, please consider sharing this video with someone in your life who might be struggling to find their voice. Knowledge is the first step toward freedom. If you want to continue discovering the life-changing wisdom hidden within the world's most influential books and join our community of learners, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps our channel reach more people. And most importantly, click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our weekly deep dives. We are here every single week to help you build a stronger, more authentic version of yourself. Thank you again for your time, your attention, and your incredible support. I look forward to seeing you in our next video. Until then, stay strong, stay mindful, and remember that you're worth protecting. Goodbye for now.